In 1933, Heidegger writes, "The great experience and delight that the Führer has awakened a new reality that gives our thinking the right track and impulse. Otherwise, with respect to thoroughness, it would remain lost, and only with great difficulty would have found its way to effectiveness." The Führer, of course, is the Nazi dictator Adolf Hitler. It here is a radically new way of thinking that Heidegger goes on to say, must be, quote, relentless and hard in its target, supple and variable in its ways and weapons. Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 18 of Black Cat Theology. These passages that I just read are from Heidegger's Black Notebooks, Schwarze Hefte, which are private notebooks that he kept during the 1930s and that have recently been published. Currently, they are the focus of intense discussion and debate. The passages, as I mentioned, come from 1933, when Heidegger has just been elected the first Nazi rector of Freiburg University. During the course of his rectorate, he will proceed to implement the total Nazification of Freiburg University because he was, at the time, an enthusiastic member of the Nazi Party. Why was he enthusiastic? He seems to think that this new political movement will help to advance, to foster, and advance and to underwrite the radically new way of thinking he thinks needs to emerge. He thinks that the political movement, there will be a symbiotic relationship between the Nazi political movement and this radical new way of thinking. Now, what does this material have to do with the kinds of questions that we have been pursuing in this lecture series? Now, before we start to answer that question, I think it's important at the outset to make the following observation. It's important for us not to let Heidegger's repulsive fawning over Hitler and National Socialism distract our attention from what might be very important philosophical material in these passages from the Schwarze Hefte in 1933, when Heidegger, quite frankly, is really juiced up over National Socialism. In this regard, I'm reminded of an anecdote that Quine told about his former teacher, Rudolf Carnap. Quine and Carnap were discussing the modal notions of necessity and possibility, contingency, and so forth. And Carnap was defending the philosophical usefulness of these notions, whereas Quine was very skeptical about the philosophical relevance of modality. And at one point, Carnap says, well, look, we don't like cockroaches, but nevertheless we study them because they might, and they in fact are, biologically relevant. We might be able to glean biological knowledge from that. So the same thing is true of the modalities. We may not like them, but we still want to understand their philosophical significance. Now, whether Carnap is right about the philosophical importance of modal notions is another issue. But what I think is instructive for us here is the attitude that he has. Let's not let our disgust towards Heidegger's views, his pro-Nazi views, distract us unduly from subjecting this material to a very careful philosophical and theological analysis. Now, what is the connection, though, between this material from the Black Notebooks and our own project? Well, to begin to answer that question, let's jump ahead to an interview that Heidegger gave in 1966 to the German magazine Der Spiegel. The name of that interview is Only a God Can Save Us. In the course of this interview, among other things, Heidegger is reflecting back over his earlier involvement in National Socialism. And at one point he says, National Socialism did indeed go in this direction. This direction is this radically new non-metaphysical way of thinking. Those people, however, were far too poorly equipped for thought to arrive at a really explicit relationship to what was happening today, what is happening today, and what has been underway for the past 300 years, where what is happening today, according to Heidegger, is that, and what has been happening for the last 300 years, is the emergence and burgeoning of global technology, which he sees as a threat. And he hopes that this radically new non-metaphysical way of thinking can act as a counter-irritant to that, can counteract the dangers and the threats that are being raised by that are coming to exist through the rise of global technology. Now, in this passage, what Heidegger is implying is that those people back in 1933, including presumably himself, were not ready. They were too poorly equipped to engage in this radically non-metaphysical way of thinking. What we're going to see today is that Heidegger is wrong about that in his later assessment, because when we go back and examine more carefully this Nazi philosophy that he sketches in the 1933 entries from the Schwarze Hefte, we'll see that that philosophy is not only coherent, but it is decidedly non-metaphysical. He's already engaging in this kind of non-metaphysical thinking. Why is this important for our project here? One of the things that we're going to see in this lecture and in the next lecture or so when we look at different versions of non-metaphysical thinking that Heidegger develops throughout the 30s and onward, we're going to see that if non-metaphysical thinking is left to itself, there is a very real danger that it can lead to destructive consequences. It's not necessarily the case that it will do so, but also it cannot be ruled out. So that unless there is something beyond non-metaphysical being and non-metaphysical thinking about it, unless there's something beyond that that can guide this sort of non-metaphysical thinking into more constructive paths and away from these destructive consequences, we have a real problem. There needs to be something else. This is quite compatible with what we have been saying through much of this lecture series as we have developed this Gelassenheit theology. It's very much part of the Gelassenheit theology that we've been working out, that the non-metaphysical event of being and thinking about it on the one hand is distinct from the advent of the holy or divinity or God. And that's what allows the holy to act as a guide for non-metaphysical thinking, to shunt it away from these kinds of dangerous consequences, that some of which we'll be discussing today. And we've been talking about that last time when we were seeing how the holy can enter very deeply into human agency and guide it in a proper direction and away from improper direction. So in a way, this is a continuation of that theme that we've been discussing over the last 2 or 3 lectures. So let's look at the view from 1933. Heidegger begins his discussion of this philosophical view by posing himself the following riddle. The worthiness for power and its possession, does that come from justice? Because one has justice? And for what reason does he have justice? Because he has power? Now here it's important to recognize that Heidegger is echoing a very famous question that Socrates raises in Plato's dialogue, the Euthyphro, having to do with the relationship between the gods and the holy. In particular, is it the case that the gods are holy because they love something that is holy independently of them? Or does it go the other way around? Is something holy only because the gods love it? Which way does that dependency run? Now here, in 1933, Heidegger is transposing that question into one about the possession and exercise of power. And whether somebody's worthy to exercise and possess power. So how does that dependency go? Is someone worthy to possess and exercise power simply because he possesses and exercises it? Or should he possess and exercise it because he in fact is already worthy? So which way does the dependence go? Should somebody possess and exercise power, or maybe should a society possess and exercise power because it's worthy? Or is it only worthy because it already possesses and exercises power? And Heidegger has in view here a very specific kind of social arrangement, in particular a fascist or Nazi state where there's the leader, der Führer, and das Volk, the people. So what is it that makes the leader and the people together worthy to possess and exercise power? That's the question that Heidegger is tracking here. Now, the next thing that he does is he thinks about the situation in which the leader issues to the people, the Nazi leader, the Führer, issues to the people, or das Volk, an assignment that they need to fulfill. And the German term for that occurs in the Schwarze Hefte is Auftrag, an assignment. So Heidegger wants to get clear about what an assignment is and what's a good assignment, when is an assignment a proper one, or something like that. And he begins by saying what an assignment or an Auftrag is not. He says, the assignment, not a powerless idea we think every now and then, not a hovering picture that until now we look at, rather what is given to human existence in its ground to bear, just as if it stands in a stream that flows against us. So notice that this notion is not a powerless idea, the Auftrag, or the assignment. Heidegger here is explicitly rejecting a certain kind of metaphysical picture where, well, what makes an assignment such, and what makes it a good assignment, is that it corresponds to some kind of external, radically independent metaphysical reality, like a concept out there, or an idea, or a Platonic form, right? He rejects that kind of metaphysical picture, so that here we can already begin to see that Heidegger's thinking in 1933 is already, contrary to what he suggested in the later interview, he's already well on the way, or well on the non-metaphysical path, because he rejects this patently metaphysical way of thinking about the nature of an assignment and what makes it a good assignment. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean that the leader and the people in the Nazi state, that they are worthy to possess and exercise power only because they already have it? Is he opting for some kind of crude voluntarism? And the answer to that question is no, he's not. To see why that's the case, we need to look at a little bit more from the 1933 Schwarze Hefte entries. In particular, at one point Heidegger says, consider how through leading and following, the highest assignment is distributed, interwoven, and thereby, beiläufig is the German term for that, scattered in the state and the people. Now the operative term here is this German word beiläufig. I had to go to a German cultural forum where some of my German friends helped me to tease out what that means, because I wasn't capable of finding it in a Wörterbuch, in a dictionary. And so there are a number of connotations that this term has. So it's beiläufig. Let's look at the by part of it. There's another German term that's beiläufig. And what that means is incidentally, or in passing. So that's one connotation, something that's incidental or is in passing, that's occurring in passing or incidentally. But then in beiläufig, we also have wörfig, where the notion Wurf, this root, is related to German words like an Entwurf. An Entwurf is like a plan or a blueprint. But then werfen is the German verb for to throw. And so there's also this connotation of something being thrown incidentally or in passing, and that might be caught, right? There are also echoes here of Heidegger's notion of Daseinsgeworfenheit, or thrownness, which is the fact that Dasein finds itself already thrown into a world in a particular situation that is not of its own choosing. That's something that he discusses in the existential analysis of being in time, Simon Zeit. So all of these connotations are at play with this curious term beiläufig. Something is being thrown, a model or a blueprint or a plan, I should say, is being thrown incidentally in passing by someone to other people, and that might be caught. And the implication is that, well, this blueprint or this plan or Auftrag, this assignment, might be well thrown, and it might be caught or not caught by the people. And if it's caught, if it's received, it may be done so in a good way or in not such a good way. So what we have here is this notion of an assignment being thrown by the leader or thrown by the leader to the people, das Volk, and depending on whether they catch it and how they do, will determine whether the leader and the people within this situation of a Nazi state, it will determine whether the leader and the people are worthy to possess and exercise power, depending on the outcome. There's no way ahead of time of knowing whether the leader and the people are worthy of possessing power. There's no way of knowing that antecedently to what Auftrag is thrown by the leader and how it's caught by the people. Now let me give some examples of that. Suppose that the Nazi leader commissions or gives the assignment to the people that, well, I want a comprehensive infrastructure project in which we are going to rebuild all the bridges and all the roads in this land. We're going to make them brand new and top notch in 3 years. That's the assignment, or that's the Auftrag. And so then the people set about to work and to fulfill that. Now, are the leader and the people together, are they worthy to possess and to exercise power or not? Well, that depends on the outcome. There's nothing out there in some platonic heaven or some kind of free-floating concept that they correspond to, or not, as the case may be, that will determine whether they are worthy of possessing and exercising power. The only thing that determines that is the particular outcome of the leaders throwing the people this assignment and how they receive it and how they implement it. So that could go different ways. For example, one possibility is that, but 3 years go by and not even half of all the bridges and the roads have been built. And so in that case, maybe the leader gave the people an assignment that was too difficult. It was too much, too soon, and they weren't able to do it. So that's a failure. The leader is certainly not worthy to possess power if he's going to give the people an assignment that they can't fulfill. That's just too difficult for them. All right? A second scenario is this. Suppose that the leader gives this Auftrag, this assignment, and that the people do complete all the infrastructure improvements within 3 years. But let's suppose that in the case of the bridge construction, there's one team, the people divide themselves into two teams, and one team is responsible for renovating the bridges, and the other team is responsible for repairing and rebuilding the roads. So let's suppose that the squad among the people that was assigned to build or rebuild all the bridges has several hundred tons of stones left over after this. Is that a good thing or not? Have the leader and the people proven worthy to possess and exercise power or not? Well, that depends on the outcome. Could go two ways, we might imagine. One way is, well, maybe the people who built the roads are already finished. They don't need any more materials, and so we just have this surplus. That would be a waste, right? And in that case, we would say, well, look, the people and the leader they've proven kind of worthy to possess and exercise power, but they could have done better because they have this surplus. And so that would somewhat temper our judgment of whether this was a successful Auftrag that was thrown by the leader and caught by the people. They caught it, but they could have caught it better. And maybe that's because he should have been a little more thoughtful, or maybe it's because they were a little too irresponsible or whatever, or maybe it's a combination of both. That's one way it might play out. Suppose it plays out another way, though. Suppose that the leader throws this assignment and the people divide themselves into the bridge squad and the highway squad, and once again we have this remainder of several hundred tons, let's say, of stones from the bridge project. And lo and behold, it turns out that that's exactly, or more or less, the amount that the people in the road crew need to repair their part of the Auftrag. So everything comes together. Remember that German term I used, geschmeidig. Very skillfully and supplely, everything comes together. And there was no way of knowing that would happen ahead of time. It depends on how it comes later, what happens later. Only then can we look back then, and in that scenario that I just described, can we say, aha, both the leader and the people, der Führer und das Volk, they have proven themselves to be highly worthy of possessing and exercising power, at least in this instance, because an assignment was thrown by the leader to the people caught it, and they caught it in such a way that there was no waste, there was no excess, there was no fat. It was geschmeidig. It was very skillfully executed. And that's what we would do, we would say. And if that were to happen over the course of the history of this Nazi state we're imagining, then we would say that because there is a track record of the leader throwing to the people these Aufträge or assignments that were then caught and skillfully executed, the longer that goes on, the more often that occurs, the more we would be inclined to judge that the leader and the people have proven themselves worthy of possessing and exercising power. What's important here is that is radically non-metaphysical. There is nothing out there beyond this swim of communal action within this hypothetical Nazi state that determines whether the leader and the people are worthy to possess and exercise power. That is only determined within the swim of action itself. It's totally internal. That's the kind of view that Heidegger is setting forth in 1933. It's thoroughly Nazi, it's a National Socialist philosophy, but it is also radically non-metaphysical, contrary to what Heidegger implies in the later Der Spiegel interview. Now, let's conclude today's lecture by observing what's problematic about this. Suppose that there's nothing else but this kind of non-metaphysical communal action in the Nazi state where the leader is giving the people assignments and they're skillfully executing them. Let's suppose that they do a great job and it goes on for decades and decades of the leader issuing these assignments and then the people skillfully fulfilling them in the way that I described. Well, that could nevertheless be completely compatible with the people and the leader issuing assignments and the people skillfully executing assignments that are morally monstrous. So suppose that the leader issues to the people the following assignment. I want you to build a series of concentration camps in which we will take Jews, homosexuals, and other undesirables and exterminate them. I want you to do this. This is the assignment. We're going to do this within 10 years or maybe 5 years. Let's say it's the 5-year plan, the Nazi 5-year plan. And so suppose that the leader throws them this assignment, the people catch it, and then they execute it in a way where there's no excess and there's no fat. They very skillfully and expertly execute this kind and fulfill this Auftrag. Then, according to Heidegger's 1933 philosophy, both the leader and the people there will have proven themselves to be worthy of possessing and exercising power. But what they've done is a moral nightmare. They've committed a moral transgression that is almost unimaginable. It's horrible. It's a monstrosity. This is what I was talking about at the beginning of the lecture, where if we simply confine ourselves to this kind of non-metaphysical thinking, where here we have in view the view from 1933, it is compatible with the leader and the people skillfully issuing and executing morally monstrous projects and assignments. That is not something that we want to underwrite. That is not something that we want to promote. But if we don't have anything except the non-metaphysical event of being understood this way in 1933, and the kind of non-metaphysical thinking, or to use a term from Simon Sight, circumspection, if that's all we have here, then somebody, a particular Nazi leader and people, might prove themselves to be worthy of possessing and exercising power by, building concentration camps and exterminating 6 million people, which is in fact what happened. Heidegger very conveniently in his later discussions, well, he doesn't really discuss his earlier, he doesn't ever apologize for being a Nazi, but he very conveniently sort of sidesteps one of the worst things that ever happened in the history of the human beings. And so this is the kind of problem that I was talking about. And what we need here is something beyond the non-metaphysical event of being and non-metaphysical thinking and assignments and people obeying or fulfilling the assignments. Something beyond that that can steer people, human beings, especially in this kind of collective setting, away from those kind of morally monstrous assignments and away from the kind of totalitarian and oppressive regimes like the one that Hitler set up in Germany in 1933. So that's the connection to the material that we've been discussing here. Now, next time, I want to continue in this vein and look at some other things, some other ways that Heidegger tries to develop this non-metaphysical way of thinking also in the later 30s and on into the 40s. We're going to see that the same kind of problem crops up, even though he makes it sound like he's offering us something radically new, and in some way he is, but the same kind of problem will arise. Then we will be in a better position to see how the holy, including some of the traditional Christian understanding of that, when it's brought to play or brought into to bear through this Gelassenheit theology that we have been developing, will help to militate or safeguard us, let's say, against these kinds of things. So that's everything for today. Thank you for watching. I know that this was a somewhat lengthy lecture, but I feel justified because I believe that this material is very important today, especially given what's going on in the world today. We need to be mindful of these kinds of issues, not simply because of what we're doing in Black Hat theology, but also what's going on in the United States and the world at large today. We need to be vigilant. Thank you for joining me, and I'll see you next time.